There's a strange feeling many people who grew up in the 1980s recognize immediately. It's the sense that the world didn't just change, it shifted into something fundamentally different. Faster, louder, more demanding, and somehow less grounded. This isn't nostalgia talking, and it isn't resistance to progress. What you're experiencing is something far more physical than that. Your nervous system was shaped in a world with pauses. A world where attention had limits, where stimulation arrived in doses instead of floods, and where silence wasn't something to escape, it was simply part of life. Your brain learned how to regulate itself without constant input. It learned patience before urgency became the default. Today's world runs on a completely different operating system. Continuous alerts, endless visibility. A steady hum of urgency that never fully shuts off. For many people, this feels normal because their nervous system's developed inside it. For you, it doesn't. It never did. So when you feel overstimulated, drained, or quietly out of sync, it's not because you failed to adapt. It's because you're running modern life on hardware built for depth, not noise. That sense of being on a different planet isn't metaphorical. It's biological. And once you understand that, the discomfort starts to make sense. Not as weakness, but as mismatch. If you grew up in the 1980s, hope wasn't something you had to manufacture. It was the background noise of the world. This wasn't because life was easy or perfect. It was because the dominant message you absorbed, quietly, repeatedly, was that effort led somewhere. The future felt open. Progress felt possible. The story playing in the culture around you said, try, and something might work. That matters more than we realize. During childhood, the brain doesn't just learn facts, it learns expectations. It learns what to assume about tomorrow. And for many people growing up in the 1980s, the nervous system was calibrated around a simple baseline. The world may be hard, but it's not pointless. That baseline shapes everything. It's why you tend to move through challenges with endurance instead of panic. Why setbacks feel frustrating, but not identity-shattering. Your system learned persistence before it learned despair. Now contrast that with the modern emotional climate. Constant crisis language, economic uncertainty framed as permanent, a steady stream of warnings about what's broken, collapsing, or too late to fix. For nervous systems that grew up inside that atmosphere, vigilance feels normal. For you, it feels exhausting. Not because you're naive, but because your internal wiring expects forward motion, not endless alarm. When hope is your baseline, living in a world of continuous threat drains you in a specific way. You keep going longer than most, but you also feel the loss more deeply. That doesn't make you outdated. It means you were shaped by a time when believing in the future was part of growing up, and your nervous system never forgot what that felt like. For many people who grew up in the 1980s, freedom arrived early, not as a philosophy, but as a daily reality. You came home to an empty house. You figured out your own snacks. You managed your time, your boredom, your mistakes without an adult hovering nearby. No constant check-ins, no step-by-step guidance, just space, and the expectation that you'd handle it. That kind of childhood builds real strength. Children who experience regular, unsupervised time often develop strong internal motivation. They learn decision-making from consequences, not instructions. They discover that they can solve problems on their own. Over time, that becomes self-trust, a quiet confidence that says, I'll figure it out. But there's another side to that story that rarely gets named. When independence is learned too early, it can come with an unspoken lesson. Needing less makes life easier. You adapt by relying on yourself, not because you're emotionally distant, but because it works. You learn to contain frustration, to wait things out, to move forward without asking for help. That pattern doesn't disappear when you grow up. As adults, many people from this generation are deeply capable and quietly lonely, not because they lack connection, but because they're not practiced at depending on it. Asking for support can feel unnatural, even uncomfortable. You don't reach out easily, and when you do, it's often already heavy. So the same freedom that built your resilience also shaped your distance, not as a flaw, but as an adaptation that once kept things running smoothly and now deserves to be understood. If you wanted something growing up in the 1980s, you worked for it, and then you waited. You saved coins for weeks before you could play a game. You rode your bike to the arcade, knowing the machine might already be taken. You sat by the radio, finger hovering over the record button, hoping the song you loved would play at just the right moment. Even entertainment required effort, timing and patience. At the time it felt normal, but neurologically it was shaping something powerful. When rewards are delayed, the brain learns how to regulate desire. Dopamine isn't just released at the moment of getting something, it's released in anticipation, in the planning, in the pursuit. Your nervous system learned that satisfaction builds gradually, and that effort is part of pleasure, not an obstacle to it. That wiring stays with you. It's why you can work toward long-term goals without constant reassurance. Why you don't need immediate feedback to stay committed, and why shallow rewards often feel strangely empty. Clicking, scrolling, instant access, it gives you the outcome without the journey, and your brain notices the difference. This is also where a quiet frustration begins. Modern systems are designed for speed, not meaning. Effort is minimized, waiting is eliminated. And for a brain built around the chase, this creates a kind of emotional flatness. You do the thing, get the reward, and feel nothing. Not because you're ungrateful, but because the process that once made rewards satisfying has been removed. This is why many people from this generation are incredibly persistent, yet quietly dissatisfied. You know how to work, you know how to wait, but the world no longer asks you to do either in a way that feels earned. Your nervous system was trained for a rhythm where effort mattered, and when that rhythm disappears, it can feel like motivation without meaning, movement without fulfillment. When you grew up in the 1980s, the world was solid. Things had weight, objects took up space, and when something broke or disappeared, it was gone for real. You owned tapes, records, books, photos, collections. If they were lost, there was no cloud to recover them from. If something stopped working, it didn't magically update itself overnight. You either fixed it, replaced it, or learned to live without it. Loss was tangible, and so was value. That kind of environment teaches a very specific form of confidence. You learn early that problems exist in the physical world, and that most of them are solvable with patience, creativity, or persistence. You don't expect systems to save you automatically. You expect to figure things out. That's why, when something breaks today, technology, plans, routines, you don't immediately panic. Your nervous system recognizes disruption as familiar territory, not catastrophe. But there's a trade-off. Growing up in a tangible world also trained you to trust what you can see, hold, and understand. Digital uncertainty, things that vanish without explanation, rules that change overnight, systems that feel abstract and impersonal, can feel deeply unsettling. Not threatening exactly, but ungrounded. This is why prolonged ambiguity wears you down more than sudden crisis. In a clear emergency, you're steady. You act, you adapt. But when nothing is visibly wrong and everything still feels unstable, your system stays on edge, waiting for something solid to grab onto. Your calm under pressure isn't accidental. It comes from a lifetime of navigating a world where consequences were real, visible, and manageable, and where breaking didn't mean ending. It meant adjusting, repairing, and moving forward. Before life became something to document, it was something you simply lived. If you grew up in the 1980s, your attention had nowhere else to go. There was no second screen pulling you away, no notifications interrupting the moment, no quiet pressure to capture what was happening for later. When you were somewhere, you were there, fully in the room, fully in the experience. That trained something rare. Your nervous system learned how to stay with a moment without needing constant stimulation. Boredom wasn't a failure, it was a doorway. Waiting wasn't anxiety-inducing, it was normal. You learned how to let time pass without filling every gap, and that ability became a kind of internal steadiness. This is why you can sit in silence without panicking, why you don't need background noise to feel okay, and why being constantly interrupted feels more draining than engaging. Your brain wasn't trained to split itself in 10 directions at once. It was trained for depth. In today's world, that depth can feel like a liability. Modern life, rewards, responsiveness, visibility, and constant engagement. Presence gets mistaken for slowness. Stillness gets mistaken for disengagement. And people who can focus deeply often feel out of place in environments designed for perpetual motion. But here's the truth. Presence is not outdated, it's foundational. It's the capacity that allows real listening, real connection, and real memory. And while the world has changed, your nervous system still operates as if attention matters, because it does. You weren't trained to be everywhere at once, you were trained to be here. And that skill, though rarely named, is one of the most grounding forms of strength you carry forward. Self-reliance is one of the most admired traits of your generation. You handle things, you adapt, you don't collapse at the first sign of difficulty. When something needs to be done, you do it, often without announcing the weight you're carrying. But there's a cost to that kind of strength that rarely gets named. When you grow up learning that independence keeps life running smoothly, you also learn quietly that needing too much can complicate things. So you adjust, you minimize, you push through discomfort without making it visible. Not because you don't feel deeply, but because you're skilled at containing it. Over time, that containment becomes habit. As an adult, you may notice that people assume you're fine, even when you're not. You don't signal distress easily. You don't reach out at the first sign of strain. And when you finally do, it often comes late, after exhaustion has already set in. The strength that once protected you now creates a kind of distance others don't know how to cross. This is where quiet loneliness can take root. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being unseen, of being valued for your capability more than your inner world, of having people trust you to carry things without realizing how heavy they've become. Understanding this doesn't mean abandoning self-reliance. It means recognizing that strength doesn't have to equal isolation, that support isn't a failure of competence, and that allowing yourself to be held occasionally doesn't erase the resilience you earned. It simply gives it somewhere to rest. For many people who grew up in the 1980s, the problem isn't that the world is harder. It's that it feels noisier in ways that are difficult to explain. Modern life is built around speed, visibility, and reaction. The systems we move through reward immediacy, respond quickly, share instantly, stay available, be seen, be updated. Emotion itself becomes something to display, react to, and move past as fast as possible. If your nervous system developed inside this environment, it can feel normal, stimulating, even energizing. But if your nervous system was shaped in a slower, more contained world, it can feel overwhelming and strangely hollow at the same time. This is the mismatch. You were trained for continuity, staying with things long enough for meaning to form, for depth over display, for conversations that unfolded without an audience. In contrast, modern culture often flattens emotional experience. Everything is compressed into headlines, posts, reactions, and cycles that reset before anything has time to settle. That doesn't mean people today feel less. It means feeling happens faster, and often without integration. For you, that pace can feel emotionally shallow, not because there's no depth available, but because there's no space for it to develop. The constant demand to move on interferes with the way your nervous system processes experience. So when you pull back, disengage, or feel drained, it's not apathy, it's self-regulation, a system protecting itself from overload by stepping out of a rhythm that no longer matches how it was designed to function. You're not resisting the modern world. You're noticing that it asks you to operate in a way that costs you something, and your nervous system hasn't forgotten how depth is supposed to feel. For a long time, strength meant speed. Move on, adapt quickly. Don't linger. Don't slow the system down with feelings that take time to process. If you grew up in the 1980s, you learned how to do that well. You became efficient at recovery. You learned how to stabilize yourself and keep going. And in many ways, that ability still serves you. But healing asks for something different. Healing doesn't come from becoming faster, tougher, or more productive with your emotions. It comes from knowing when you no longer need to brace yourself. From recognizing that the conditions that once required constant resilience are no longer the same. Softening isn't weakness, it's recalibration. It's learning to pause without assuming something will fall apart, to rest without earning it, to receive support without feeling incompetent. For a nervous system trained in self-reliance, these are not intuitive skills. They feel unfamiliar because they weren't necessary when you were younger. But maturity isn't just about what you can carry. It's about knowing what you no longer have to. This is where many people from your generation get stuck. Not because they can't heal, but because they try to heal using the same strategies that once helped them survive. They push themselves through emotional strain instead of letting it resolve. They stay capable instead of staying connected. Learning when to soften means letting regulation replace endurance. It means allowing safety to do some of the work your willpower used to do alone. And over time, that shift changes everything. Not by taking your strength away, but by giving it room to breathe. Healing doesn't ask you to become someone else. It asks you to stop running at a speed your nervous system no longer needs. If the world sometimes makes you feel out of place, it's tempting to assume you've fallen behind, that your pace is wrong, that your way of processing life belongs to another time. But that story misses something essential. You're carrying skills that didn't disappear because they stopped mattering. They disappeared because the world stopped teaching them. Patience, emotional containment, deep focus, the ability to stay steady without constant reassurance. These aren't outdated traits, they're rare ones, and rarity often gets mislabeled as irrelevance. You were shaped by a world that asked you to be present, resourceful, and self-directed before those qualities became optional. That shaped how you move through uncertainty, how you handle pressure, and how you relate to silence, even when it feels uncomfortable to live this way now. Those capabilities are still working quietly in the background, keeping you grounded when things get chaotic. This isn't a call to reject the modern world. It's an invitation to stop erasing yourself to fit it. You don't need to unlearn who you are. You need to understand why you are this way and how to let these strengths coexist with a world that moves differently. When you do, the sense of being behind starts to dissolve. What remains is clarity and a quieter kind of confidence that doesn't need to prove itself. If this video helped you recognize something about yourself, you're not alone here. This channel is a space for people who want to understand the deeper patterns behind how we adapt, endure, and heal. If you found this meaningful, consider subscribing so you don't miss future videos. And if any part of this reflected your own experience, share it in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to feel understood. Thank you for watching.